My office smells like books. The smell, a mixture of printing ink, old paper, and dust, has been with me for almost 5 decades. Sometimes I think it's embedded in the skin of my fingers, soaked into my hair and clothes. Students must smell it as I walk the hallways of Ellendale University, 72 years old. It's hard to believe the numbers have anything to do with me. In the mirror, I see the same Willard Harlow I was at 40, only with gray hair and a network of wrinkles. The mind doesn't age, I tell my students. It's only the body that fails, and not by much. My back is a little sore in the morning. My knees creak on the stairs, but overall I'm in better shape than many of my peers. Today I gave a lecture on metamodernism in contemporary literature. The young faces in the audience are a combination of genuine interest and polite boredom. They listen, they take notes, but few truly immerse themselves in the material. Sometimes I catch myself thinking that I've been teaching too long. Perhaps it's time to give way to younger teachers with their trendy theories and enthusiasm. But then I remember how Lydia Amber's eyes lit up when I quoted a passage from Wollacott, and I realize, no, not yet. From my office window I can see University Square, with its centuries-old oaks and brass statue of its founder. I've been admiring this view for 34 years. That's as long as I've lived in my house on Crescent Street, a Victorian 3-story mansion with a turret and veranda that looks almost ridiculous in Little Ellendale. He bought it for next to nothing when the real estate market collapsed and rebuilt it piece by piece. Darby had been 11 at the time. Darby, my son, who's arriving today with his wife and kids. He's been visiting me more often lately, every 2 weeks instead of his usual Christmas visit. Something has changed. I'm trying not to be cynical, but years of reading human characters through the lens of literature does its job. There's a motive behind every unexpected action. Chekhov taught me that when I was a student. The phone on the desk rings, jolting me out of my musings. "Professor Harlow," I say, holding the receiver to my ear. "Willard, you old devil." Morton Fawcett, my colleague from the history department, sounds as cheerful as ever. "Do you remember that there's a committee meeting today?" "Shit," I sigh. "I totally forgot. I've got Darby coming with his family." "Oh, the writer's here," Morton said, a subtle sneer in his voice. He'd never thought much of my son's literary talents. "Say hello. Tell him I'm still waiting for his new book. It's coming out. When is it?" "Next month," I answered, defending my son out of habit. "Shadows of Ellendale. It's a regional publisher, but it's got a decent print run." "Well, well," Morton hums. "So what about the committee?" "Tell them I'm sorry. Family trumps bureaucracy." "If you say so. We'll discuss the results over lunch tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I agree and hang up the phone. Gathering my papers in an old leather briefcase, I lock my office and walk down the wide staircase of the main building. A few students greet me with nods. Professor Lynch stops for a brief conversation about the upcoming conference. Gradually, the academic part of the day recedes and my thoughts return to the upcoming visit. Darby has never been a brilliant student, unlike me. Somewhere in the back of my mind I was always disappointed by this, though I never showed it. He chose literature not out of passion, but rather out of inertia, following me. His novels, well, they're not bad. They're just not good. Middle grade that lacks depth and originality. And yet I used every contact I had to help him. A red-haired cab takes me home in 10 minutes. I pay, leaving a generous tip, an old habit of a man who remembers what it's like to make every penny count. My house greets me with silence and coolness. The high ceilings, the wood paneling, the stained glass windows in the living room all create a special atmosphere that is hard to describe in words. Here, history is felt physically. Maybe that's why Darby chose historical fiction as his genre. He grew up among these antiques and the ghostly shadows of the past. I have 2 hours before they arrive. Enough time to shower, change, and make dinner. Nothing complicated. Steaks, baked potatoes, salad. Darby likes simple food, and his wife Neva pretends to follow some complicated diet, but always eats a double portion of dessert. I used to love cooking elaborate meals for Elizabeth. She appreciated the gestures, saying that in another life I could have been a chef. After her death 15 years ago, cooking became a necessity rather than a pleasure. Some skills, however, are not forgotten. The doorbell rings at 6 o'clock sharp. Darby's punctuality is one of the few qualities he's inherited from me. Papa! He embraces me with exaggerated warmth. He's wearing an expensive coat and scarf that looks too pretentious for Ellendale. You look great. For your age, you mean? I grin, accepting the compliment and inviting them in. Neva kisses my cheek. She smells like expensive perfume and some kind of falseness that perfume can't hide. Willard, the house looks amazing, she says, looking around like she's evaluating a potential purchase. Did you change anything in the hallway? Just change the lamp, I say. The old one burned out. My grandchildren, Lance and Olivia, ages 13 and 10, crumple awkwardly at the door. They look like little adults in their fancy clothes and their cell phones in their hands. Hi, Grandpa, Lance says with a polite smile that doesn't affect his eyes. Hello, Professor, Olivia adds. She's the only one in the family who calls me that. I think it's her way of creating distance. Your rooms are ready, I say. Lance, I found some old comic books in the attic. I think you might be interested in them. Thanks, he replies without enthusiasm, but I read mostly graphic novels now. It's not that big of a difference, I say. Superheroes in tights are still superheroes in tights, no matter how much the publication costs. Darby laughs, but in a strained way. Dad still lives in the world of high literature kids. To him, Faulkner and Joyce are pop culture. We walk into the living room. Darby immediately heads to the bar and pours himself a whiskey. Neva studies the pictures on the mantelpiece, pretending to see them for the first time. The kids are staring at their phones. How's the new book coming along? I ask, trying to start a conversation. Oh, terrific. Darby takes a sip of whiskey. The publisher says it could be a breakthrough. He says that about every book you've ever written, I remark, not holding back a smile. This time it's different, Darby insists. By the way, we've signed a movie contract for Shadows of Morgantown. Really? I'm genuinely surprised. That novel, in my opinion, was the weakest of the bunch. Yeah, it's a small independent studio, but, you gotta start somewhere. Sure, I nod. Congratulations. Neva intervenes in the conversation. Darby is too modest. They offered very good terms. We're even thinking about buying a second house, something closer to New York. I notice her casting an appraising glance at the ceiling beams. There's something about that look that makes me uneasy. How are things going at the university? Darby asks, changing the subject. Still pushing the rock up the mountain? Sisyphus was happy, I reply with a quote from Camus. But yes, it's a work in progress. I have several promising grad students this year. Have you ever thought about retirement? Neva asks the question as if in passing, but I sense a catch. Why? So you can sit at home and stare out the window. Well, you could travel, she suggests, or move somewhere warm. This house is too big for one person. That's it. I can see why their visits have become so frequent. I like this house, I say calmly, and the local climate suits me just fine. Grandpa, Olivia said suddenly, looking up from her phone, is it true you helped Daddy publish his first book? That's an interesting question from a kid who's usually only interested in social media. Yes, I answer. I had some connections in the publishing world, but the talent was his own. Dad says he wouldn't have become a writer without you, Olivia continues. I only opened a few doors, I shrug. It was up to him to walk through them. Darby looks a little embarrassed. Come on, Dad. You know you've done so much more than that. Without your recommendations, no one would have noticed me. Maybe, I agree. But you're standing on your own 2 feet now. That's the main thing. There's an awkward silence. Neva breaks it by offering to help me with dinner. We go into the kitchen, leaving Darby in the living room with the kids. "Willard," she says, chopping the salad, "Darby and I have been thinking a lot about your future." "Really?" I raise an eyebrow, flipping steaks in a pan. I'm flattered by this attention. "Don't be ironic," she lowers the knife. "We're concerned. You're 72. This house needs constant upkeep. The stairs, the garden, the roof. What if you fall? Who will help you?" "I have neighbors," I answer, "and I'm not as decrepit as I look." "That's not the point," Neva lowers her voice. "Darby will never tell you straight, but I will. We think you should sign the house over to him. It will ensure your safety and your future. So that's what this is about." I look at her, and for a moment I feel funny. So transparent, it's almost insulting. "And how will it keep me safe?" I ask calmly. "Well, you could continue to live here, of course," she adds hastily. "It's just that legally, Darby will own the house. It'll save you from taxes and worries. And well, if you need medical care, it'll all be taken care of." I flip the last of the steak in silence. Neva takes my silence as agreement and continues. "We could help with the renovations. You know, update some of the rooms. Don't you think there's a little too much antique?" "I like antiques," I answer. "It reminds me that some things retain their value over time." Neva looks annoyed but quickly masks it with a smile. Of course. Just think about it, okay?" Over dinner, the conversation returns to safe topics: the kids' school, the latest movies, politics. Darby recounts anecdotes from the writing life, most of which I've heard before. Neva brags about her new interior design project. The kids respond in one-word answers when addressed directly. After dessert, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, Darby offers to show the kids old photo albums. To my surprise, they agree, leaving their phones on the table. We go through snapshots from the past: Darby as a child, Elizabeth with her unchanging smile, me in a tweed jacket with a pipe I haven't smoked in a long time. The memories come in waves, but I hold them back. Sentimentality doesn't suit a literature professor. "Look, Daddy," Darby points to the picture of us standing in front of this very house on the day we bought it. "Remember when Mom said it was the craziest decision of your life?" "I do," I nod. She was right. Still, it was the best kind of crazy. "The house was only worth $80,000 back then," Darby says, turning to his kids. "And now its market value is—" "Darby," I interrupt, "not everything in this world is measured in money." "Of course it is, Dad." He looks embarrassed. "I just wanted to tell you that you made a good investment." "I bought a house to live in," I say, closing the album. "Not for an investment." The evening ends late. I go up to my bedroom, leaving my son's family in the guest rooms. Lying in the dark, I reflect on what I've heard and seen today. Neva was too direct, but Darby probably agrees with her. Home. They need my house. I can't blame them. Human nature is unchanging. Greed, practicality, the desire to secure the future. It's all understandable. But there's something particularly bitter about the way they don't even try to hide their motives. It's as if I'm too old to see the obvious, or too sentimental to confront it. As I fall asleep, I'm reminded of Shakespeare's words about ungrateful children. How much sharper than a serpent's tooth to have an ungrateful child? Perhaps tomorrow I'll quote that line at breakfast, just to see Darby's reaction. It's been a week since Darby's visit. Oddly, his family didn't leave Sunday night as originally planned. They stayed all week, citing that the kids loved it in Ellendale and wanted to spend more time here. I didn't want to disappoint the grandkids, although I noticed that Lance and Olivia spend most of their time tucked away in their devices rather than exploring the neighborhood. It's Tuesday, and I've just returned from a morning lecture. The house greeted me with an unusual bustle. Neva was measuring the living room with a tape measure, and Darby was writing something down in his notebook. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my briefcase on the table by the entrance. They flinched, as if I'd caught them in the act. "Dad!" Darby quickly slammed the notebook shut. "We weren't expecting you this early." "I canceled the counseling session," I replied, taking off my coat. "So?" Neva exchanged a quick glance with her husband and smiled her practiced smile. "We were just thinking. You know, Willard, this house needs some modernization. Darby tells me that the plumbing hasn't been changed since the 90s, and the wiring—" "I upgraded the wiring 5 years ago," I interrupted. "It's up to modern standards. If you don't believe me, I can show you the certificates." "Dad," Darby came over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. "We're just worried about you. This house is a real historical monument, but it needs constant attention. And well, you're not getting any younger." I shook off his hand and walked over to the chair by the fireplace. My chair that remembers the shape of my body better than my son remembers the days I was born. "I'm doing fine," I said, sitting down. "I have Ted to do the heavy housework and Mrs. Loomis to clean. And, as you've noticed, I'm not getting any younger, but I'm not going senile either." "Nobody's talking about senility, Pa." Darby looked hurt. "We just want to help." "And how do you plan to help?" "By measuring my living room." Neva stepped in again, reeling out the tape measure. "We were thinking that perhaps you should consider remortgaging the house." To Darby, "This is it. Straight talk, finally." "And why would I do that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Taxes, Dad." Darby sat down on the armrest of the couch. "Property taxes go up every year. Why would you spend your pension on that? If the house is deeded to me, we'll be responsible for all the costs. You'll be able to live here just the same, but without the financial burden." I looked at my son, a 40-year-old man with thinning hair and a soft chin. Something in his eyes reminded me of his mother, the same shade of green, the same sincerity, or a well-played sincerity. "I'm not struggling financially, Darby," I replied. "The professor's pension and book royalties cover my expenses." "For now, yes," he nodded. "But what about 5 years from now, or 10? You don't think you'll be teaching forever, do you?" I wondered. "Of course I'm not going to teach forever, but I'm not going to be sitting on the doorstep of an almshouse." "Let's not be dramatic," I said. "I understand my prospects perfectly well." Neva sat down on the couch next to her husband, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. "Willard, we don't want you to think we're imposing. It just makes legal sense to transfer the property up front. That way, you can avoid probate and inheritance problems in the future." "My will is in order," I said, "and it clearly states that the house passes to Darby when I die." "Of course, Dad," Darby nodded. "But the inheritance process can be complicated and expensive. If we did it now, we could avoid the expense and bureaucracy." I got up from my chair and walked to the window. Behind it, I could see the garden that I had nurtured for decades. Every tree, every bush had a story to tell. This was where Elizabeth had planted the roses the year Darby was born to us. It's where I installed a bench in her memory after she died. "Let me think about it," I said finally. "This is not a decision that can be made in 5 minutes." "Of course, Dad," Darby stood up. "There's no pressure. Just think about it, okay?" The rest of the day passed in a strange atmosphere. We ate lunch together, talked about the weather, about Darby's new novel, about Olivia's school progress. But the subject of home hung in the air like an invisible cloud. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Darby started talking again, alone with me in the study. "Daddy," he began, twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands, "I want you to know that nothing is going to change. You're going to live here like you always have. This will still be your home. Only legally it will be yours," I clarified. "It's just paperwork," Darby shrugged. "What difference does it make whose name is on the papers if you're still living here?" I sipped from my glass, feeling the whiskey burn my throat. Big difference, son. Possession isn't just a legal technicality. It's control, it's the power to make decisions. You think I'm going to make decisions about your house behind your back? Darby looked insulted. Dad, I'm your son. That's why I thought about your offer, I replied, despite my doubts. The next morning at breakfast, Neva returned to the subject of the house, but from a different angle. Willard, she said, buttering her toast, Darby and I have been thinking. If you decide to rewrite the house, we could help you make travel arrangements. England, perhaps? You've always said you'd like to spend more time in Oxford. I looked at her with interest. How long do you think this trip should last? Well, she hesitated. As long as you like. A month, 2 months, maybe even 6 months? We could look after the house while you're away. Very generous, I said dryly. And then what? Do I come back and find the place still the same? Of course, Neva exclaimed. We would only maybe update the kitchen and the bathrooms. They're so outdated, aren't they? I finished my coffee in silence. So that's it. Send the old man on a trip and, in the meantime, redecorate the house to your liking. Classic Victorian novel scenario. At noon, I met Morton Fawcett at our favorite cafe near the university. Morton had been a friend of mine for 30 years, ever since we both came to teach at Ellendale. He was a historian with a sarcastic wit and an unmistakable sense of human motives. They want your house, he stated after listening to my story. It's a classic story. Parents get old. Kids start circling like vultures. Isn't that too dark a metaphor? I cringed. Darby's not a vulture, he's just practical. He's a mid-level writer with a wife whose appetites are bigger than their income. Morton sipped his coffee. And they see a house that's worth, what? $500,000? More? About $600,000 at the last appraisal, I admitted. There you go. 600,000 reasons to evict the old man. Darby swears I can live there as before, Morton snorted. And do you believe it? I wondered. Do I believe my son? Should I? I want to believe, I answered honestly. He's my son, my only child. Willard. Morton leaned across the table to me. We're both historians in the broad sense. You study people through literature, I study historical events. And we both know that human nature doesn't change. Power corrupts. Once the house is rewritten, the balance of power will shift. You'll be a guest in your own home. Are you suggesting I turn him down? I'm suggesting you be realistic. Morton leaned back in his chair. If you want to leave him the house when you die, fine. But why give it to him now? What's in it for you? I didn't know what to say. Really, what's in it for me? When I got home, I found that Neva had invited an interior designer. A young woman with a tablet was walking around my house taking notes and pictures. What's going on here? I asked, trying to contain my irritation. Oh, Willard. Neva looked embarrassed. This is Zoe. She's just counseling us. For the future. What future? I raised my voice. I hadn't agreed to any changes yet. Darby came out of the kitchen. Dad, I'm sorry, we should have warned you, but this is just a counseling session, nothing concrete. I gave my son a long look. Zoe, I turned to the designer, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. There will be no changes to the design of this house. Thank you for coming. The girl looked puzzled, but quickly gathered her things and left, mumbling apologies. As soon as the door closed behind her, I turned to Darby and Neva. This is out of line, I said quietly. You're acting like I've already agreed to give you the house. Dad, we just wanted to be ready, Darby began to justify himself. If you agree, we can start the repairs right away, while you're in England. And if I don't agree, I asked bluntly, what then? Neva and Darby exchanged glances. Of course, that's your right, Darby said finally. But I thought we had an agreement. We didn't agree on anything, I countered. You made a suggestion, and I said I'd think about it. And what did you decide? Neva asked. I sighed. What did I decide? I am 72 years old. Darby is my only son. This house will still go to him after I die. Maybe Morton is exaggerating the danger? Maybe I'm too suspicious. I've decided, I began slowly, that I want guarantees. Written assurances that I can live in this house for the rest of my days without any changes that I don't approve of. Darby's face brightened. Of course, Papa. We can draw up an agreement that spells it all out. I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow. My lawyer, I clarified. Linus Hampton. Whatever you say, Darby agreed. It's important that you feel protected. The next 2 days were spent preparing documents. Linus Hampton, my attorney for 20 years, had drawn up a deed of gift with a detailed agreement about the terms of my residence in the house. The document guaranteed me veto power over any changes to the house, required Darby to pay for all utilities and repairs, and included a clause allowing me to terminate the agreement and repossess the property if the terms were violated. It's too complicated, Dad, Darby said as he looked over the documents. Can't we just make a family arrangement? Family arrangements are good when it comes to who does the dishes, I replied. When it comes to real estate, it's better to have everything on paper. Neva looked unhappy, but remained silent. Darby eventually agreed to all the terms. On Friday, we met at Linus's office to sign the papers. Are you sure you want to do this? Linus asked me when we were alone before the final meeting. Even with these guarantees, you're giving up control of your house. I know, I nodded, but I have to trust my son. If I can't trust him, who can I trust? Linus didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. The documents were signed in the presence of a notary. Darby looked unusually solemn. Neva was glowing. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety as I signed the deed of gift. This is it, Darby said as we walked out of the office. Nothing's changed, Dad. The house is still yours for everything but the legal formalities. I'm counting on it, I replied, shaking his hand. In the evening, we had a small celebratory dinner. Darby opened a bottle of champagne. Neva cooked her signature roast beef. The children were surprised at their parents' high spirits, but they didn't ask questions. To a new chapter, Darby toasted, raising his glass. To family and tradition. I nodded silently, sipping my champagne. A new chapter. It sounded almost ominous. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms and Neva had done the dishes, Darby sat down next to me on the veranda. Papa, he began quietly, I know this decision wasn't easy for you, and I appreciate your trust. I hope it pays off, I replied. Of course. He patted my knee. Neva is already making a list of designers to consult on the renovation, but of course we won't do anything without your approval. I looked at my son carefully. Darby, I'm not planning any renovations. I like my house the way it is. Yes, but some things are really outdated, he objected. The bathrooms, for example, and the kitchen could be more modern. No, I shook my head. No changes at all, at least as long as I've lived here. Darby frowned, but quickly put a smile back on his face. Of course, Dad. Whatever you say. After all, this is your home. Not legally, I reminded him. But in essence, yes, he assured me. Always will be. As I looked up at the night sky, I wondered if I'd made the right decision. Morton had warned me. Linus looked worried. But isn't that what family is all about, trust? The belief that blood ties are stronger than greed and selfishness? By the way, Dad, Darby interrupted my musings. Are you still thinking about going to England? We could organize it as early as next month. Perhaps, I said evasively. But not until the semester is over. Sure, he nodded. Just let us know when you decide. We'll make the arrangements. I didn't doubt that they would. The question was what they would do and where it would lead. But the papers were signed, the decision was made. Now all that was left was to live with the consequences and hope that I hadn't made the biggest mistake of my life. 3 weeks had passed since the papers were signed. Darby's family left the day after the papers were finalized, promising to return in a month. I returned to my usual routine: lectures, counseling, evenings with a book by the fireplace. Life seemed to be back on track. On Wednesday night, I was checking student papers when the phone rang. It was Darby. "Dad." There was a strange tension in his voice. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I answered. Nothing had changed since we talked on Monday. "Good, good," he paused. "Listen, Neva and I are thinking of coming down this weekend. We've got some news." "What kind of news?" I put my pen down. "Better when we meet," he answered evasively. "Nothing urgent, just, family stuff." Something in his tone made me wary, but I agreed. After all, he's my son, and he has the right to visit me whenever he wants, especially now that the house technically belongs to him. Saturday morning, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw not only Darby's family minivan, but also a truck with the logo of a design firm. That was the first alarm bell. I opened the door before they even rang. Darby looked nervous. Neva looked determined. The kids stayed in the car. "What's going on?" I asked, blocking the entrance. "Why is there a truck here?" "Dad, let's go in and talk first." Darby tried to squeeze past me. I reluctantly stepped back, letting them into the house. We walked into the living room where my books, my pictures, my memories still stood. "So?" I crossed my arms over my chest. Darby looked over to Neva, and she nodded as if giving him permission. He took a deep breath. "Dad, we've made the decision to start renovating the house. A complete renovation. We've hired designers, builders. It all starts on Monday." I stared at him, not believing my ears. "Without my consent. We have an agreement, Darby. I have veto power over any changes." "Yeah, but, he hesitated. "We think it's necessary. The house is outdated. It needs modernization." "It's my house." I felt anger rising inside me. "I live here, and I didn't consent to the renovations." "Technically," Neva intervened, "it's not your house anymore, Willard. It belongs to Darby." I turned to her, surprised by her bluntness. "The agreement clearly states that I have the right to live here on my terms." "Yeah, but it doesn't say we can't make improvements," she countered. "And renovations are improvements." "Neva," Darby put his hand on her shoulder as if urging restraint. "Dad, listen. We think now is the perfect time for that trip to England we've been talking about. You could go away for a couple months, and when you come back, the house will be as good as new." I looked at my son, and suddenly everything fell into place. This was the real plan. Lure me out of the house under the pretense of traveling, and then, what? Turn my house into something unrecognizable? Or maybe not let me back in at all? "No," I said firmly. "No renovations, no traveling. I'm staying here, and everything stays as it is." Neva's face contorted with irritation. "Willard, be reasonable. You can't live in the past forever. This house needs modernization." "It's my house," I repeated, "and it will stay just the way I like it." "No, it's our house," Neva suddenly exploded, losing her temper. "We've spent years caring for you, visiting you, listening to your endless lectures about literature no one reads. And now, when we finally have a chance to do something for ourselves, you get in the way." "Neva!" Darby looked shocked. "Dad, that's not what she meant." "That's exactly what she meant," Neva cut him off. "I'm tired of pretending. Darby, tell him the truth." My son looked like he'd been cornered. He ran his hand nervously through his hair. "Dad, listen to me. We're having financial difficulties. My new book isn't selling very well. The publisher canceled the contract for the next one. We need the money. So you decided to kick me out of my house?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not kick me out," Darby said hastily. "It's just, we were thinking of renting it out. It would be worth a lot more after the renovations. We could get a good rental income." "What about me?" I asked. Where is there room for me in this plan? Darby and Neva exchanged glances. We found a very nice apartment for you, Darby finally said. Not far from the university. Small but cozy. Everything you need. I sat back in my chair, feeling the ground slipping from under my feet. They'd planned the whole thing. All this time, all this talk about caring, about taxes, about my welfare, it was all a lie. I'm not leaving, I said, calmly. I have a legal right to stay here. Yes, but we have rights too. Neva stepped closer. Darby owns the house. He can decide what to do with it. The agreement says, "To hell with the agreement," she exclaimed. "You're not going to sue your own son, are you?" I looked at Darby, searching his eyes for a hint of remorse, a hint that he disagreed with his wife. But he avoided my gaze. "Is that your position, Darby?" I asked quietly. "Do you want me to leave?" He finally looked up. "Dad, you have to understand. This is temporary. As soon as we're back on our feet, you can come back." "Answer the question," I insisted. "Do you want me to leave?" Darby swallowed. "Yes," he said finally. "I think it's best for everyone." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling something inside me die. When I opened them again, it wasn't my son in front of me, but a stranger with his face. "Okay," I said, standing up. "I'll leave. Give me time to pack." "How much time do you need?" Neva asked, clearly surprised by my surrender. "A week," I replied. "I need to pack books, personal belongings, contact a lawyer." "A lawyer?" Darby tensed. "Why?" "To review my will," I said simply. "Among other things." The statement hung in the air like a threat. Neva and Darby exchanged concerned glances. "Dad, there's no need to make any hasty decisions," Darby began. "I think all the necessary decisions have already been made," I interrupted him. "You've decided to kick me out of my house. I choose to leave with dignity and to reevaluate certain aspects of my life." Neva looked concerned. "Willard, we didn't mean for things to turn out this way." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "I think it's going exactly as you planned. The house is yours now. I'm leaving. Mission accomplished." "Dad?" Darby took a step forward. "We didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, business." "Business," I repeated. Interesting word for a father-son relationship. There was an awkward silence. I broke it first. "If you don't mind, I'd like to start packing." "Of course." Darby looked embarrassed. We'll leave you alone." They left the living room, and I was left sitting in the chair, staring at the walls that would soon no longer be mine. Elizabeth's photographs, books collected over a lifetime, furniture chosen with love. All of it would now either be thrown away, sold, or hidden in the attic. After a few minutes, I went upstairs and began methodically putting the books into boxes. Each one was like an old friend I had to take with me from a burning house. My hands acted mechanically and my brain refused to comprehend what had happened. In the evening, when the first shock had passed, I went down to the kitchen to prepare supper. To my surprise, Darby and Neva were there, animatedly discussing something with a man I didn't know, apparently a designer or builder. "Oh, Dad," Darby looked embarrassed. "We weren't expecting you so early." "This is my kitchen," I reminded him, "at least for another week." The stranger held out his hand to me. "Brent Hodges, architect. We were just discussing a possible remodel." I ignored his hand. Remodeling my kitchen in my house without my consent? "Dad," Darby sighed, "we thought it was settled." "It's settled that I'll be gone in a week," I said. "Not that you can start renovations before then." Brent looked uncomfortable. "I think I'm going to go. I'll call you later, Mr. Harlow." When he left, Neva turned to me with poorly concealed irritation. "Could you be a little more accommodating? We're trying to arrange things in such a way as to minimize inconvenience to everyone." "Inconvenience," I almost laughed. You're kicking me out of the house I've lived in for 34 years and you call that an inconvenience? No one's kicking you out, she countered. We're offering alternative accommodations. Which I didn't ask for and don't want, I countered. Darby interjected. Dad, let's not turn this into a drama. You said you'd leave with dignity. And you promised that nothing would change when I re-signed the house, I reminded him. Apparently, we're both breaking promises. At that moment, Lance and Olivia walked into the kitchen. They stopped in the doorway, sensing the tension. What's going on? Olivia asked. Nothing, honey, Neva replied hastily. Grown-up talk. Is Grandpa leaving? Lance looked at me. Yes, Lance, I answered, looking him in the eye. Your father and mother have decided that it is better for me to live somewhere else. Daddy, Darby exclaimed, don't drag the children into this. Why not? I asked. They need to know how the world works. Today you kick your father out of his house. Tomorrow, they'll probably do the same to you. Darby's face turned red with anger. This is not fair. We're not kicking you out. We're just what? I took a step toward him. Call it by your name, Darby. You tricked me, forced me to rewrite the house, and now you're throwing it away like it's worthless. That's enough, Neva exclaimed. Children, go to your rooms. Olivia and Lance reluctantly left the kitchen, but I noticed Olivia turn around and look at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Pity? Understanding? Shame? When the kids left, Darby came close to me. Listen, Dad, he said quietly, but with pressure. You've always prided yourself on being a realist. So let's face it, this house is too big for you. You're getting old. You need something more compact, more manageable. And that's why you waited until I signed the house over to you to give me this truth? I asked. Darby averted his eyes. We were afraid you wouldn't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly well, I said. Better than you think. The next morning I woke up early and continued packing. The kids and Neva were still asleep, but Darby was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee when I came downstairs. Dad, he began, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. We could have approached it more delicate. You apologize for the form, but not the substance, I pointed out, pouring myself a cup of coffee. The point remains the same. You want me to leave. Darby sighed. Yes, we want you to move, but not because we don't love you. It's just, we're really struggling financially. If we rent this house out, we can get out of debt. What debt, Darby? I sat across from him. What's really going on? He was quiet for a moment, then exhaled. I haven't gotten a contract for the new book. The publisher says my sales are slipping. And we've got a mortgage, kids' school, loans. We need money, Dad. And you've decided the best way to get it is to kick your father out of his house. Thanks for the house, Dad, but now. He didn't finish the sentence. Now get out. I finished it for him. Is that what you're saying? Darby didn't answer, and his silence was more eloquent than any words. I finished my coffee and stood up. You know, Darby, I once used all my connections to help you become a writer. I called editors, publishers, critics. I set up meetings. I wrote recommendations. I believed in you even when your books were mediocre. Dad. No, let me finish. I held up my hand. I didn't do it because you were talented. I did it because you were my son. And I thought that was more important than talent. Now I see I was wrong. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him sitting with his head down. Something inside me clicked. The anger and bitterness I'd been holding back suddenly transformed into cold determination. If Darby thinks he can just throw me out and continue his career like nothing happened, he's sorely mistaken. Going up to my office, I pulled out my contact notebook. It was old-fashioned, with a leather cover and yellowed pages. But the names and phone numbers in it were invaluable. Editors at major publishing houses, literary agents, critics, literature professors from prestigious universities, people who shaped the literary world, people who listened to Willard Harlow's opinions. I didn't yet know exactly what I was going to do, but a plan was beginning to form in my head, a plan that would show Darby that betrayal had a price. By noon, I finished packing the basics and went downstairs. In the living room, Neva was showing something on a clipboard to the interior designer, a plump woman with bright red hair. "Oh, Willard," Neva faked a smile. "How's the packaging coming along?" "Fine," I replied. "I think I'll be ready to leave in a couple days, not a week like I'd planned." "Really?" She couldn't hide her relief. That's wonderful." "I thought you'd be glad," I said. "The sooner I leave, the sooner you can turn this house into an income stream." The designer looked confused, not knowing how to respond to the obvious tension. "I'll probably come back later," she said, standing up. "No need," I smiled at her. "I'm leaving. Do whatever you want with this house. Turn it into an entertainment center if you like. After all, it's not my house anymore." I walked out of the living room feeling the stares of both women on me. In the hallway, I ran into Olivia, who seemed to be eavesdropping. "Are you really leaving, Grandpa?" she asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart," I answered. "Your parents decided that. Is it because of the money?" She was surprisingly perceptive for her age. "Partly," I nodded, "but also because of the choices we make. Your father made his choices." "Did you make yours?" she asked. I looked at my granddaughter with a new respect. At 10 years old, she understood the conflict better than many adults. "Yes, Olivia," I said. "I made my choice. And you know what? I don't regret it." She nodded as if accepting my answer and walked down the hall. I watched her go, thinking that maybe all was not lost in this family. That evening, I packed the last of my things and booked a room at the Claridge Hotel, not the cheapest in town, but certainly the most comfortable. If Darby thinks I'm going to live in some tiny apartment they've picked up for me, he's wrong. In the morning, I hailed a cab and started carrying boxes out. Darby came out of the house as I was loading the second load. "Do you need help?" he asked tentatively. "No, thanks," I said dryly. "I'll be fine." "Dad," he faltered, "I know you're angry, and you have a right to be, but I hope that in time you'll understand." I straightened up and looked him in the eye. "I understand now, Darby. You chose money over your father. That's your right. But don't expect me to applaud your choice." "It's not that simple," he began. "No, Darby, it is exactly that simple." I closed the trunk of the cab. "Thanks for the house, but now get out." "Isn't that what you were going to say?" He flinched as he heard his unspoken words. "Dad, I'm leaving," I interrupted him. "The house is yours. Do what you want with it, but don't call me, don't write me, don't try to explain. At least not yet." I got into the cab without looking back. As the car moved, I couldn't bring myself to look back at the house I loved, the son I still loved despite everything. Instead, I stared ahead, thinking about the phone calls I'd make as soon as I got to the hotel, about the letters I'd write, about the connections I'd activate. Darby wanted a house. He got one. But he didn't yet know the price he'd pay for betrayal. The room at the Claridge Hotel was exactly as I'd expected, spacious, elegant, overlooking the park. I sat in a chair by the window, an old notebook in a shabby leather binding in front of me. It held the names and numbers of people I'd worked with, befriended, argued with over 50 years in the literary world. Some of the contacts were out of date. People had died, changed jobs, retired. But many were still active and influential. I took no vindictive pleasure in planning my actions. Rather, it was a cold, calculated necessity. Darby needed to be taught a lesson, not just about the house, about the betrayal, about the lies, about throwing me out of his life as soon as he got what he wanted. I made the first call to Margaret Winslow, editor-in-chief of Glenwood Press, not the biggest, but respected in literary circles. I had once helped her get the job by writing a letter of recommendation to the publisher's owner. "Willard!" Her voice sounded warm and surprised. "What a surprise! I haven't heard from you in ages." "Hello, Margaret," I allowed myself a slight smile. How are you? We exchanged pleasantries, recalled mutual acquaintances, discussed the latest literary awards. Then I carefully steered the conversation to the right topic. Margaret, I hear you're considering a manuscript by my son, Darby Harlow. Oh yes, she sounded a little embarrassed. The Whispers of Old Walls, a historical novel. We haven't made a final decision yet. I see, I paused. You know, Margaret, I've wanted to talk to someone about this for a long time. As a father, I've always supported Darby's literary ambitions, but as a professor of literature, I have to admit that his writing is getting weaker and weaker. Really? There's a wariness in her voice. I thought his recent novels were well received. Commercially, perhaps, but in terms of literary value, I sighed. Moreover, I have serious concerns about his professional ethics. What do you mean? I don't want to go into details, I said softly but firmly. Let's just say I'd think twice before getting involved with him. And this opinion is not only as a father, but also as a man who has devoted his life to literature. There was a pause. Margaret was smart enough to realize that I wouldn't say that about my own son without good reason. Yeah, I'll bear your opinion in mind, Willard, she said at last. Thank you for your candor. Will this stay between us? Of course, professional ethics. We ended the conversation on a friendly note, but I knew I'd taken the first step toward undermining Darby's literary career. I didn't say anything specific, but doubt had been planted. And in the publishing world, doubt is usually enough to get a manuscript rejected. Next on my list was Richard Baker, an influential literary agent who worked with several major publishers. I'd once helped him publish his first and only book, after which he'd gone into the agent business. "Professor Harlow," he exclaimed when he heard my voice. "What an honor! To what do I owe the honor?" I didn't beat around the bush. "Richard, I'm calling about a delicate matter. It's about my son, Darby." "Oh yes, he's obviously tense. He's a talented writer. I hear he's having trouble with his current publisher?" That's what I wanted to talk about. I looked out the window at the park where a young couple was walking their dog. "Darby's looking for a new agent and might reach out to you." "Actually, he's already contacted me," Richard admitted. "He sent me a synopsis for a new book." "What do you think?" I asked in a neutral tone. "Honestly, nothing much, but the Harlow name carries a certain weight." He stopped as if realizing something. "Wait, you're calling to recommend him?" "No," I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "It was the other way around." There was a pause. "I understand," he said finally. "May I ask why?" "Let's just say we had a disagreement, not just personally, but professionally. I can no longer guarantee his reliability as an author." "That's a serious statement," Richard sounded puzzled, "especially coming from his father." "That's why I'm calling," I tried to speak calmly. "Because it's serious. I can't go into details, but believe me, Richard," I paused, "working with Darby right now is not a good idea." "I appreciate your candor, Professor," he said after a brief silence, "and I'll certainly take it under advisement." I knew he would do more than just take note. Richard Baker valued his reputation and would not risk contacting an author he had been warned about by a respected literature professor. Over the next 2 hours, I made 5 more calls, 2 editors of literary journals, a New York Times critic with whom we had once taught together, the director of a literary festival, and the head of a book club that had significant sales clout in the region. Each conversation followed a similar script: a friendly greeting, an exchange of news, and then a careful but unequivocal warning about Darby. I didn't explicitly say he was a bad writer or a dishonest man. I was only hinting, sowing doubt, leaving an implication. We had a disagreement. I can no longer recommend his work. I have concerns about his professional ethics. That was enough. In the literary world, reputation is everything. And Professor Willard Harlow's reputation was impeccable. By lunchtime, I felt tired, not physically, emotionally. Each call took a piece of my soul. I felt no satisfaction in what I was doing, more like a sense of dire necessity, like a surgeon removing gangrenous tissue, unpleasant but necessary. I ordered room service lunch and, while I waited, checked my email. Among other things was an email from Arthur Kingsley, my longtime friend from England. We'd met while still in graduate school at Oxford and had kept in touch over the years. "Dear Willard," he wrote, "I look forward to your arrival. The house is all ready, new roof, fresh paint, even the internet has been installed, although the signal, admittedly, leaves much to be desired. It's very quiet with only the birds, the sheep in the neighboring field, and the occasional tractor from Farmer Higgins disturbing the idyll. A perfect place for writing and reflection. Let me know when you've decided on a date to come. Yours, Arthur." I smiled, picturing the little stone cottage in the English countryside Arthur had told me about. It had been a forester's lodge 2 centuries ago, then stood abandoned for a long time until Arthur had bought it, along with a plot of land, and restored it. Now he used it as a guest house for friends, preferring to live in the main house nearby. I replied that I planned to visit in 2 weeks, as soon as I had finalized my business in Ellendale. Without going into details, I mentioned that a family emergency had arisen that forced me to look for a new place to live. After lunch, I continued my campaign. This time I decided to take a broader approach, sending emails to several literary reviewers I knew. I didn't mention Darby directly in the emails, but simply asked for their opinions on contemporary historical prose, noting that I thought the genre was in crisis because of the influx of commercial authors who put formula over authenticity. I knew they would get the hint, especially if they received Darby's manuscript soon. At 4 in the afternoon, the phone rang. It was Morton Fawcett. "Willard, where the hell are you? I went over to your house and there's some construction workers and designers running around. Your son told me that you, moved out?" "That's right," I replied. "I'm at the Claridge's." "At the hotel?" Morton sounded shocked. "What's going on?" I briefly told him the events of the last few days. Morton listened, occasionally interrupting me with exclamations of indignation. "I told you so," he exclaimed when I had finished. "I warned you that as soon as you rewrote the house, the balance of power would shift." "You were right," I admitted. "I should have listened. So what now? You gonna sue him? You have that residency agreement." "No," I shook my head. "No lawsuit. I found another way to get justice." I told him about the calls I'd made to publishers and literary agents. Morton whistled. "Harsh," he said, "but fair. He hit you where it hurts the most, at home. You hit him on his career." "I'm not proud of it," I said honestly. "But he needs to realize that actions have consequences." "And then what?" Morton asked. "Will you stay in Ellendale?" "No." I looked at the letter from Arthur on the laptop screen. "I'm going to England. An old friend has offered me a cottage in the countryside. I think it's just what I need right now. Peace, quiet, a chance to write." "Writing?" Morton sounded surprised. "You're starting a new book?" "Maybe." I wasn't sure myself. "I've had a lot of thoughts over the years. Maybe it's time to put them down on paper." We agreed to meet for dinner the next day, and I continued my campaign. Next on the list was Hamish McIntyre, an influential book blogger whose reviews could have a significant impact on sales. "Professor Harlow," he exclaimed when I introduced myself, "I've read all your work on metamodernism. It is an honor to speak with you." I thanked him and cut to the chase. "Hamish, I'm calling about contemporary historical prose. I've noticed you write about it a lot on your blog." "Yes, it's one of my favorite genres," he confirmed. "I'd like to share some observations." I paused. "I've been noticing a disturbing trend lately. Authors who use historical entourage but don't bother to research the period in depth." "Absolutely agree." Hamish sounded enthusiastic. This is a real problem. Do you have any specific examples? I don't want to name names. I feigned awkwardness in my voice. But if you've read my son's latest work, Darby Harlow. Oh, Hamish was clearly embarrassed. Yes, I'm familiar with his novels. Then you know what I mean, I sighed. As a father, I've always supported him. But as a scholar and a critic, I can't turn a blind eye to flaws. That's a very honest position, Hamish said respectfully. Not many people would be able to evaluate the work of a loved one so objectively. Sometimes truth is more important than family ties, I said with a slight bitterness, thinking not only about literature, but also about recent events. We talked for a few more minutes about trends in contemporary literature, and I realized that I had achieved my goal. Hamish, who had a reputation as a strict critic, would now look at Darby's work through the prism of my remarks. By late afternoon, I had made several more calls, including a conversation with the organizer of a literary conference where Darby was scheduled to speak the following month. I didn't directly ask that his invitation be rescinded, but made it clear that his participation might raise certain questions in the academic community. That was enough. Organizers of such events avoid any potential scandals. As I dined in the hotel restaurant, I went through my contact list, noting those I had already contacted and those I had yet to call. I acted methodically, like a strategist planning a military campaign. But unlike military action, my strategy was quiet, invisible to the average eye. Darby will probably never know why his career suddenly went downhill. He'll blame the market, the publishers, the readers, but not the father he kicked out of the house. The next morning, I called the university and made an appointment with the dean. I needed to officially take a semester off and possibly submit my resignation. The thought of leaving the department after so many years brought mixed feelings, but I realized that I couldn't teach in Ellendale knowing that my home was only a few blocks away but no longer belonged to me. After talking to the dean, I called the airline and booked a flight to London for the following week. Then contacted Arthur to let him know the exact date of arrival. "Great," he exclaimed. "I'll meet you at the airport. You won't regret it, Willard. Somerset is beautiful this time of year. Green hills, old stone walls, sheep in the pastures, a real English pastoral." "Sounds just what I need," I said. "A place where you can forget about recent events." "Has something happened?" There was concern in Arthur's voice. "You don't sound like your usual self." "I'll tell you when I see you," I said. "It's a long story." After lunch, I continued my campaign, this time focusing on literary critics of specialized publications. By the evening, I had a headache and my hands were shaking a little. Still, at 72, such emotional strain is not easy. But I felt that I had achieved my goal. Darby's reputation in the literary world had been seriously damaged, though he did not yet know it. Morton came to dinner and we had a long talk about my plans for the future. "Are you sure you want to leave the country?" he asked, finishing his steak. "It's a different culture, a different climate. It's not easy at our age." "I spent 5 years in England when I was young," I reminded him. "I've always wanted to go back. Maybe it's fate to end the circle where it began." "That sounds too fatalistic for you," Morton shook his head. "You've always been a rationalist." "The rationalist in me says there's no point in staying in a city where every corner reminds me of a lost home." I sipped my wine. "And as for age, I'm 72, not 92. I can still adapt." Morton didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. Instead, he raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to just revenge." I grinned and raised my glass. "To justice," I corrected him. "Revenge is too big a word for what I did." "What would you call it?" Morton asked curiously. "Restoration of balance," I answered after a pause. Darby broke the unwritten law of the family. I was just showing him that every action has consequences. We talked late into the night, reminiscing about our years at the university, discussing colleagues, students, books. Morton promised to come visit me in England next year. I wasn't sure it would happen. We were both not getting any younger, and traveling was getting harder, but the thought of our friendship continuing across the ocean was heartwarming. When I returned to my room, I found a message from Olivia, my granddaughter. She had somehow found my email address and wrote a short letter. "Grandpa, I miss you. Mom and Dad fight about the house all the time. I heard you're going to England. Can I write to you?" I was touched. In the turmoil of the last few days, in the bitterness of betrayal, I had almost forgotten about my grandchildren. They were not to blame for their parents' decisions. I immediately replied, "Dear Olivia, I miss you too. Of course we can correspond. I will be happy to tell you about England, and you will keep me informed about your life. Your loving grandfather." The next day I concluded my campaign with a few more calls and emails. By lunchtime I felt I had done all I could. Now all that was left to do was wait for the results. I was sure they wouldn't be long in coming. In the evening I decided to take a walk around town, perhaps for the last time before I left. Ellendale was a small college town with a beautiful historic center, neat streets, and old trees. I had taught here for 34 years, knew every corner, every building. The thought of leaving it all made me sad, but not regretful. Sometimes you have to leave in order to move on. As I passed a bookstore, I saw a Darby novel in the window, his latest work, Shadows of Ellendale. I paused, staring at the cover with the image of an old mansion that looked suspiciously like my house. There was something ironic about it. My son had kicked me out of the house but used its image for his book. I went inside and grabbed a copy off the shelf, flipped through the pages, picking out individual phrases, paragraphs. Darby wasn't a bad writer, just not an outstanding one. He wrote smoothly, professionally, but without a spark of genius, without the kind of genius that makes a reader return to a text again and again. Perhaps that's why he was so easily pushed off the literary stage. His place could have been taken by any other mid-level writer. I put the book back on the shelf and walked out of the store. My mission was accomplished. Now all that was left to do was pack my things and prepare for a new chapter of life, a chapter that would begin in a quiet English village where no one knew the name Darby Harlow. Back at the hotel, I began to pack my suitcases. Clothes, books, a few memorabilia, everything that was left of my former life. The rest I left in the house, seeing no point in fighting over furniture or dishes. The only thing I regretted was my library. Thousands of books collected over decades were now left in a house that no longer belonged to me. But I consoled myself with the thought that in England, I would start a new collection. After all, books are not just physical objects, but windows to other worlds, and those worlds are always with me, no matter where the books themselves are. Looking at the nearly packed suitcases, I suddenly felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the weight of the past, the weight of attachment to material things, to a particular place had fallen from my shoulders. At 72, I was starting a new life. It was scary, but also amazing at the same time. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. It was Arthur. "Everything is ready, my friend," he said cheerfully. "The house is waiting for you. I've even planted some pumpkin seeds in the backyard just in time for your arrival." "Pumpkins?" I smiled. "What makes you think I want to grow pumpkins?" "I don't know," Arthur laughed. "I just thought it would be a fitting occupation for a retired literature professor. There's something metaphorical, growing something with your own hands, watching it grow, mature." "Sounds like fun," I agreed. "I've never gardened, but I've always wanted to try." "That's great," Arthur exclaimed. "You'll be a professor of pumpkin growing." We laughed, and I felt the tension of the last few days begin to let go. There was a new life ahead of me, without the home I loved, without the son who had betrayed me, but with new possibilities, new horizons, and perhaps with pumpkins. It's been 6 months since I moved into the little stone house in Somerset County. This morning I went out into the garden earlier than usual. The morning mist was still drifting over the ground, casting a silvery veil over the pumpkin branches. I squatted down, gently stroking the orange side of one of the pumpkins. It was the size of a large basketball and still growing. "You look impressive," I said to the pumpkin. "A couple more weeks and you'll be ready for the festival." Talking to plants had become a habit with me. In the silence of the English countryside, sometimes you want to hear a voice, even if it is your own. I didn't feel lonely, though. My neighbors were friendly. I was already known in the nearest village as the American professor who grows pumpkins, and once a week I traveled to the University of Bristol to give guest lectures. I straightened up, feeling a slight ache in my lower back. Age was taking its toll after all, though I felt better overall than I had in recent years in Ellendale. The physical labor in the garden, the fresh air, the rhythm of life, it was good for both body and mind. Back in the house, I put the kettle on and turned on my laptop. Every morning I looked through the news of the literary world, an old habit I didn't want to give up, and admittedly, part of it was due to a desire to see how Darby was doing. Today, among other things, was a review of a new book, a novel by my son which had come out, albeit late and from a different publisher. The review was not scathing, but tepid. Darby Harlow's novel Guests on the Doorstep demonstrates the author's technical skill but offers nothing new in terms of plot or characters. It feels like the author is writing to a formula, not venturing outside of genre conventions. I sighed, closing the page. My actions had consequences, exactly what I wanted. After my calls to literary agents and editors, Darby lost his contract with a major publisher and was forced to move on to a small regional one. He wasn't invited to literary festivals. Critics became more picky about his work, and bookstores ordered fewer copies. Not a complete career ruin, but a palpable decline. I didn't feel triumphant about it. More like a slight sadness mixed with a sense of justice restored. Darby had learned his lesson, but he could still make a living writing. After all, he was my son, and I didn't want a total collapse for him. The kettle whistled, and I made tea, a proper English breakfast that I'd grown accustomed to over the months. With cup in hand, I walked out onto the porch and sat in a wicker chair, looking out at the hills, shrouded in morning haze. In the distance I could see the outline of the village of Little Compton, a few dozen houses, a church with a pointed steeple, the King's Head pub where the locals gathered on Fridays. My phone rang, interrupting the morning idyll. I looked at the screen and saw the name Morton Fawcett. "Good morning, Morton," I said, answering the call. "It must be still evening out there." "It's almost night," he answered. "How is our hermit doing?" "Excellent," I smiled. "Pumpkins are growing, lectures are going well, neighbors are saying hello. What else do you need to be happy?" "Glad to hear it," he sounded genuinely pleased. "I have some news from Ellendale that might interest you." "I'm listening," I said, taking a sip of tea. "Your son is selling the house." I almost choked. "What? But they've just finished renovating it." "Exactly," Morton chuckled. "They've spent a lot of money on modernization, turned a Victorian beauty into something modern and impersonal, and now they're putting it up for sale. They're asking about $800,000. I was quiet for a moment, digesting the information. The house that I loved, that I had restored with my own hands, had been turned into something modern and impersonal, and now they were selling it. Strangely, I felt no pain, more like a slight regret, as if it was about an old friend with whom we had long since lost touch. "I guess they're having financial difficulties," I said finally. "Probably," Morton agreed. "Your phone calls had done their job. Darby's barely making ends meet now." "I didn't mean to ruin him," I said quietly. "Just to teach him a lesson." "Lesson learned, I think," Morton said quietly. There's something else. He asked about you. Darby? Yes. He came to the university, asked where you were, how to reach you. I told him you were in England, but I didn't give him your address. I thought I'd talk to you first. It got me thinking. Why would Darby be looking for me now? Could he be linking his professional failures to my disappearance? Thank you, Morton, I said. You did the right thing. So what do I tell him if he shows up again? I looked at my pumpkins, at the hills in the distance, at the cup of steaming tea in my hand, at my new life, which was unexpectedly pleasant. Give him my email address, I decided. If he really wants to talk, let him write. We talked some more about things at the university, about mutual acquaintances, about Morton's plans to come visit me next summer. After the conversation, I stayed sitting on the porch, pondering the unexpected turn of events. The house is for sale. Darby seeks contact with me. Life continues to offer surprises. 3 days later, an email arrived from Darby. Short, understated, with the formal address, Dear Father. He wrote that he wanted to talk and asked if he could call. I replied with a one-word yes and indicated a time when I would be available. The call came at exactly the appointed time. I was sitting in my office, a small room overlooking the garden where I had set up my desk and bookshelves. I'd already begun to assemble a new library, only 200 volumes so far, but the collection was growing. Hello, Darby, I said, answering the phone. Hello, Dad. His voice sounded uncertain. How are you? Fine, I answered. I live in the English countryside, growing pumpkins and lecturing at the local university. And you? Not so good, he said. I think you know that. I hear you're having trouble with publishers, I said in a neutral tone. Not just with publishers, Darby sighed. My whole career. It was like someone closed all the doors in front of me at once. And I started thinking, this is your job, isn't it? I could deny it, act surprised, say I had no idea what he was talking about, but lying was never my style. Yes, I admitted, my job. Why is that? It wasn't anger in his voice, but rather bewilderment. Because of the house. Are you that offended? It wasn't the house, Darby. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. It was the betrayal. You promised me nothing would change, and then you threw me out as soon as you got what you wanted. I didn't throw you out, he exclaimed. We offered you another place to live. Thanks for the house, Dad, but now get out, I quoted. Weren't those the words you wanted to say? There was a pause. I hear you're selling the house, I said, breaking the silence. Yes, he sighed. We need the money. After I lost my contract with the publisher. I understand, I said. Actions have consequences, Darby. It's a lesson you seem to have missed in your upbringing. Is that why you ruined my career? There was finally anger in his voice. To teach me a lesson. I didn't ruin your career, I countered. I just closed some doors I'd opened for you. You can still write, publish, make a living. You'll just have to do it without my help. And my children? He asked. Have you thought about them? About how your revenge would affect their lives? That was a low blow. I really didn't think about my grandchildren when I called editors and agents, or rather, I tried not to. I've been corresponding with Olivia, I said. She tells me about her life. I tell her about England. If you and Neva ever find yourselves in a financial crisis that threatens the children's well-being, I'll help. But not you, Darby. Them. Magnanimous, he said bitterly. So now what? Are you going to continue to undermine my career from your English hideout? No, I shook my head. I have done what I thought necessary. The lesson has been taught. Now it's up to you. And what exactly have you done? He asked me bluntly. Who did you call? What did you say? It doesn't matter, I answered. All that matters is that you've learned that betrayal has a price. Darby was silent for so long that I wondered if the connection had been cut. I didn't think it was a betrayal, he said quietly. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. The house is too big for you. We're having financial problems. It seemed like the logical solution. And the deception, I asked. Promises that nothing would change? Was that part of the logical solution? I was afraid you wouldn't agree if you knew the truth, he admitted. And you were right, I said. I wouldn't have agreed, because the house was important to me, not as a possession, but as a home, a place where I lived, where my memories were kept, a place I had built with my own hands. I'm sorry, Darby said after a pause. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize it would be so important to you. That's the problem, Darby, I sighed. You never thought about what was important to me, only about yourself. There was silence again. I looked out the window at my garden, at the pumpkins growing in neat beds, at the blackthorn hedge separating my plot from the neighbor's field where the sheep grazed, a world so different from Ellendale, but already mine. What can I do to make things right? Darby finally asked. To get you to stop blocking my career? Stop blocking my career? I've already said I won't interfere anymore, I replied. Now you'll have to build your reputation on your own. On your own. But that could take years, he exclaimed. Yes, I agreed. Building a reputation does take time. Destroying it is much easier. Another lesson worth learning. Dad, he sounded desperate. I can't support my family if things keep going like this. Sell the house, I said. Invest the money in something stable. Get a job that gives you a steady income and write in your spare time. A lot of writers started out that way. You never believed in my talent, did you? He asked suddenly. Even when you helped me, you only did it because I was your son. I was silent for a moment, pondering my answer. I could lie, say that yes, of course I believed in his talent. But lying was never the answer. You have ability, Darby, I said at last. You write smoothly, professionally, but you're not going to be a great writer, not because you lack technique, but because you lack depth, an understanding of human nature, empathy. Wow, he grinned bitterly. Thanks for your honesty, Dad. You're welcome, I replied. By the way, how are Olivia and Lance? They're fine, he sighed. Olivia keeps asking about you, wants to come visit you for the vacations. I'd love to, I said sincerely, if it's okay with you and Neva. We'll see, he said evasively. It's not a good time for extra expenses. I can pay for the ticket, I offered. I always have money for grandchildren. I'll think about it, Darby said. Look, I gotta go. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself, Darby, I said, and take care of your family. He hung up, and I sat looking out at the garden thinking about the conversation. There was no reconciliation or forgiveness. It was too soon for that. But there was a first step towards some new understanding, albeit bitter. A few days later, I got an email from Olivia with the news that they'd sold the house and were moving to a smaller apartment. Dad and Mom fight all the time, she wrote. Dad says he needs to focus on his new book, and Mom says we need money now, not promises for the future. I didn't respond to that part of the letter, not wanting to drag the girl into adult problems. Instead, I told her about the pumpkin festival that was being prepared in a neighboring village and how I was going to present my first harvest there. The festival was held on the last Saturday in September. I brought 3 of my best pumpkins, one huge one, weighing almost 40 kilograms, and 2 smaller ones, but perfectly shaped. To my surprise, the largest one won second place in its category, and one of the smaller ones won the prize for elegance. The local newspaper even printed a picture of me standing next to my pumpkins holding a silver trophy. Returning home with the prizes and the remaining pumpkin, the other 2 were auctioned off to benefit the local school, I felt a strange satisfaction. At 72, I had won my first farm prize. Elizabeth would have laughed at that. She always said I had absolutely no horticultural talents at all. At home, I sat down at the computer and started writing. Not lectures, not scientific articles, just notes about my new life, about pumpkins and sheep, about the mist over the hills in the mornings, about the old pub where local farmers discuss the weather and politics with equal passion, about how literature intertwines with life, how old texts take on new meaning in a new context. I didn't know if it would become a book, maybe just a diary for myself. But the process of writing was satisfying, pure, unclouded, unbound by academic ambition or professional status. A week later came a short email from Darby. Dad, I found a job as an editor at a local publishing house. The pay is small but steady. We've moved into a new apartment. Olivia wants to come visit you over Christmas break. Is that possible? I answered immediately, Sure. I'd love to see her. You too, if you want to come. There was no reply to the last part, but we agreed on the details of Olivia's visit. I felt excitement at the thought of my granddaughter seeing my new life, my garden, my pumpkins. She might even want to help me plant new seeds in the spring. October brought the first frosts. I picked the last of the pumpkins, canned some of the pulp, and made pies from some of it, which I served to my neighbors. They had already gotten used to the eccentric American professor and his pumpkin obsession, accepting gifts with gratitude and inviting me to tea. Life in the English village proved to be unexpectedly social. I met the local vicar with a passion for medieval literature, the owner of a bookstore in the nearest town, and a family of farmers whose fields bordered my garden. They all welcomed me into their circle without question, with that quiet friendliness which seems to be the hallmark of the English countryside. Sometimes, especially in the evenings when I sat by the fireplace with a book and a glass of whiskey, my thoughts returned to the house in Ellendale, to the university, to my former life. But it wasn't an agonizing nostalgia, more a quiet acceptance of a past that would stay with me, but no longer define my present. On one such evening, I pulled out a photograph of Elizabeth, the only one I had brought with me. It was taken a year before she died, in the garden of our house. Elizabeth was sitting on a bench surrounded by roses with a book in her lap and a slight smile on her face. You'd laugh to see me now, I said to the picture. A literature professor growing prize pumpkins in the English countryside. Who would have thought it? I imagined what she would have replied, probably something ironic but kind. She always had a way of seeing the humor in situations that seemed serious to me. That capacity for levity, for accepting life as it was one of the reasons I loved her. Maybe now at my age, I've finally begun to learn it. To accept the twists and turns of fate not as disasters, but as new opportunities. To see beauty in the simple things, in the growth of a pumpkin, in the morning mist, in a conversation with a neighbor across the hedge. Darby learned his lesson. I learned mine. Life goes on, presenting new challenges and new joys. And that, perhaps, is its greatest wisdom, its constant movement, its change, its ability to surprise us when we least expect it. I looked out the window, at the night sky studded with stars that seemed brighter and closer in the English countryside than in Ellendale. Tomorrow, I'll be preparing the ground for spring planting, reading a new book I received from a colleague at Bristol University, maybe writing a few more pages of my notes. And in 2 months' time, Olivia will come, and I'll show her how beautiful this corner of the world can be in winter. Life at 72 was full of surprises, and this was perhaps the most unexpected discovery of all.